Hey, I'm Scott Kennedy coming to you from Atlanta, and I'm bringing in my friend David Boclair coming to you from Nashville. We're going to talk a little Tennessee Titans versus Atlanta Falcons preseason football. First game tonight. Very exciting. David, how are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great, Scott. How are you, buddy?
I'm doing okay. A lot of storylines here. I think, unfortunately, we probably won't get to see a lot of them as far as Julio Jones coming back. Arthur Smith, we'll get to see him coach, but, in a preseason game, it's not quite as important. So I think what we'll want to focus on are some of the key roster battles that we'll see tonight. And, how much are you expecting to see from the Tennessee Titans in week one?
It's a good question. I'm not expecting to see a whole lot. Mike Vrabel has already said that Derrick Henry won't play. Julio Jones is injured. He's not going to play. It's highly unlikely you're going to see Ryan Tannehill. Caleb Farley, the first-round draft pick, he's not going to play. Mike Vrabel said he's not ready. So I think from the Titans' perspective, this is largely a day off for a lot of their big name guys, and from here they're going to sort of shift into the next phase of their training camp / preseason where they will start to up the workload for guys like that after this. But Julio is the big question mark right now in that regard, in terms of when or if we'll see him at all during the preseason. Quite honestly, they were taking it slowly with him at the start. First day he gets involved in team drills, he ends up coming up a little lame at one point. Trainers take him in, and we haven't seen him on the practice field since.
And again, from a Falcons perspective, that was going to be probably the big question about the Tennessee Titans. Are we going to see Julio Jones? If so, how much? If not, when? It doesn't sound positive early in the preseason for him.
Mike Vrabel said that they're going to take a really conservative approach with him, and when I say we haven't seen him on the practice field, that happened on Monday, I believe it was, and we literally did not see him even during a practice. He wasn't even out watching it until Thursday. So he's been obviously inside rehabbing, doing whatever he's going to do. I will say when he got hurt, it didn't look like a terrible thing. It wasn't an ugly fall or a collision or anything like that. It wasn't anything where trainers came scrambling around him. He got up slowly, walked over to a trainer, stood there, talked with him for a while, and then finally the head trainer said, "Come on, let's go inside with him." So it's probably not anything serious, but when you're talking about Julio Jones at his age and the season he had last year with injuries, this is sort of not what the Titans and their fans wanted at all when it comes to Julio, to see him getting hurt early like this.
And that's what I was going to ask you. Do you think it's more precautionary, or do you think there's a legitimate concern there?
Yeah, under Mike Vrabel, the Titans they've been very protective of older veteran players, and particularly in the preseason. But even they get into the regular season and they're comfortable letting guys not practice during the week if it means they can play during the game on Sunday. So the whole idea at this point has changed from let's get Julio involved. Let's make sure Julio knows what he's doing. Let's see how Julio and AJ Brown and Ryan Tannehill all work together. It's now, let's get Julio to week one healthy, and I think that is their primary focus at this point.
Well, and from my perspective, Julio Jones wasn't necessarily injury prone. One of the questions I think Tennessee Titans fans might have about Julio Jones is, how come he didn't have better red zone numbers, all this kind of stuff. And for me, the way the Falcons used him like a running back, it'd be, bubble screen to Julio. He'd run and run into a linebacker and push a pile 3 yards down, and then I'm getting 11 yards. Yeah, and he'd have 6 carries in a drive. By the time he'd get to the red zone, he was gassed. So I'm not totally surprised he's a little banged up right now, but I'm also not totally surprised if he's going to be okay and they're just holding him out a lot for precautionary reasons. Now, Arthur Smith made the move over. So Julio Jones goes one way, Arthur Smith comes the other. I think people have been really impressed. I know I have been with Arthur Smith so far. It's early days. So far. But, what can you expect to see from, on a high level, from an Arthur Smith offense tonight with, a lot of tight ends running game. The Falcons were bad running game and bad at protecting the quarterback last year. Is that going to get better?
Yes, it will get better, and I think that's one thing you're going to see an awful lot tonight is the run game. In the preseason, as an offensive coordinator, Arthur Smith was not a big fan of showing a whole lot. He was more about establishing a mindset and sort of a foundational approach. And my guess is he's going to want to run the ball a whole lot, and it's not going to be. It's not going to be a whole lot of different run plays. It's going to be the same run plays over and over again, and just trying to establish that physical sort of mindset. People don't know a lot about Arthur because he didn't have any sort of NFL playing career, didn't even have a particularly good college career, but he has an offensive line background, and he's never really lost that mentality. He wants to have an offense that punishes defenses and pushes them around a little bit. And my guess is tonight it will be very important for him in terms of really starting to put that mindset into place.
Well, and having grown up in Atlanta in the 80s when the Falcons were really bad, the Falcons had William Andrews and Gerald Riggs. Even when the Falcons were at their worst, they could run the ball. So I'm looking forward to getting back to that a little bit. Now, you had a player over there, D'Onta Foreman. I always want to call him Donta because I read it before I hear it. D'Onta Foreman, who spent some time with Tennessee. Does he have a chance to make this roster in Atlanta and make a difference?
He does, because he has that sort of power running style. Foreman's an interesting guy. Was the Doak Walker winner at Texas. Got drafted by the Houston Texans. You figured that was a natural fit there. He'd be a star, but he sort of almost ate himself out of the league. He was a guy who was out of shape and really heavy. Went to Indianapolis for a brief period after his 2 years in Houston, and the Colts saw enough of him quickly and passed on him. And the Titans brought him in last year, and he was actually pretty useful for him. And he talked about how he had sort of learned some difficult lessons and sort of had a better idea of what it took to be in the NFL and he's the closest thing the Titans have had to a replacement for Derrick Henry, if you will. Every other back who's been behind Derrick Henry, it's been, well, it's a change of pace. We'll do something different. With Foreman, he's a big guy who has sort of that lower his pads, run at you kind of style, and gave similar looks. But they were actually able to get Derrick Henry some rest and still keep running the same sort of plays they wanted to run with him in there. And so I think from that perspective, going back to the idea that Arthur Smith wants a powerful, punishing offense, I think D'Onta Foreman has a real chance, provided he's in shape and motivated to stick with and play for the Falcons this year.
Well, I think he'd have to be motivated. He doesn't he's not sitting on lifetime money that I know of, where he's made, you look at some of these guys and they got $10 million in the bank. You're like, you know what? He may not be all that motivated, but he needs to make this roster. And you mentioned a replacement for Derrick Henry. Let's jump over to the Falcons a little bit. I'll tell you, maybe the biggest surprise of the Atlanta Falcons camp so far has been Cordarrelle Patterson. He is 6'2", 240 pounds, nice braids, dreads. You know who he looks like? Because he's been playing running back. He's been doing one heck of a Derrick Henry impersonation at Atlanta Falcons camp. I first saw him at a junior college. He was playing wide receiver when I was director of scouting at Scout, and I was doing the junior colleges, and put 5 stars next to his name. I'm like, this guy is amazing. But one of the interesting things with him, he always played on the coach's side. So he was never on the far side. So I don't know if he needed a little extra instruction. But if you want to talk about a player that is a Derrick Henry replacement, keep an eye on number 84. You can't miss him. He's going to look really strange in the backfield because he still has his wide receiver number. But keep an eye on 84, Cordarrelle Patterson, and see what he can do coming out of the backfield with his Derrick Henry impersonation.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to scare defensive backs, the way Derrick Henry does. But Patterson's always been one of those guys that teams are always trying to figure out what to do with him. You look at him and it's always like, wow, this guy is gifted and this guy has some skills and we can use him. It's always a question of figuring out how best to use him. And one thing Arthur Smith did really well in his 2 seasons with the Titans is identify what a guy does well. All coaches talk about this. Like, we're gonna figure out what guys do well, and we'll let them do that, not ask them to do things that they don't do well. And mostly that's just lip service. But having watched Arthur Smith for a couple years, Arthur might be the best I've ever seen at that, saying, okay, we're going to use this guy in these situations and only these situations. And if we have to have this guy on the field, then that's going to mean something else to our offense, and we'll adjust accordingly. It's I would think for Arthur Smith, a guy like Cordarrelle Patterson is really, really exciting.
Tantalizing, for sure. And
creates some real possibilities.
It makes sense. If he's an all-pro kick returner, and there can't be much scarier than in the NFL than returning kicks and punts. Hitting the line of scrimmage, those guys aren't coming at you,
right,
at full speed. They're trying to, they're going to hit you, but they're not. The safety might get a running start, but if you can have the vision to return a punt or return a kick with those guys coming at you, it makes sense that you would have the vision to be a running back. And Cordarrelle Patterson's looked fantastic during the preseason. So we'll see. It's early days. I saw Deion Jones come in and punch a ball away from him. That's the worry. But as far as being a receiver out of the backfield, who's going to be better than Cordarrelle Patterson? He's played wide receiver.
Exactly.
So key roster battles. What are some of the things that you are looking for with Tennessee that as Falcons, Falcons fans should be watching too? These are the guys that are really going to be getting after it because they've got a spot to fight for.
It's not as dramatic, I guess, as a lot of other positions, but kicker is the big story in Tennessee right now. This has been it's been a 2-year sort of struggle to get settled at kicker, and they are as far from settled right now as they have been in a long time. They've got Tucker McCann, an undrafted rookie in 2020, who they sort of want to win the job, and they've got Sam Ficken, who they picked up a week and a half ago off waivers from the Jets, and these two guys are going to be kicking for their lives in the preseason, both knowing that Stephen Gostkowski, who was the kicker for this team last year and, of course, had the long career in New England. Stephen Gostkowski is still living in Nashville. And, the Titans don't want to have to pay Stephen Gostkowski money at that position this year if they don't have to. But if they have to, they will. So McCann has already beaten out another undrafted rookie from this year, and then they brought Ficken in. And McCann has kicked better in practices since Ficken arrived. So that's that's kind of the biggest talk around the Titans this year. And then the backup quarterback situation, they've got a guy, Logan Woodside, who was a 7th round pick by Cincinnati in 2017. He's been with the Titans for the last 2 years now, has 3 passes of experience in NFL regular season games, but he's been impossible to unseat for over a year now. The Titans recently signed Matt Barkley. How much can Barkley push him at this point? He's a career backup in his own right, but certainly much more experienced. And those two guys are going to get a lot of playing time against the Falcons and throughout the preseason. Those are that's another one that people are really talking about.
Oh, to be in a position where the key roster battles are backup quarterback, kicker.
Exactly. Yeah.
The Falcons don't have that luxury. I think you can go pretty much through every position and say there's a roster battle going on, which is a positive to a certain extent, except for maybe defensive line, which is a little bit of a negative because there aren't any new faces coming in on the defensive line. Grady Jarrett is there, and then it's some guys.
Yeah.
But the Falcons have a battle at backup quarterback, A.J. McCarron and rookie Felipe Franks. But if Matt Ryan goes down, the season's toast. If those two are playing, either one of those two are playing, there's in trouble. We mentioned Mike Davis is brought in to be the number 1, but Cordarrelle Patterson has been a surprise at running back. Receivers pretty well locked in. I think a lot of people are really going to look forward to seeing Kyle Pitts. Kyle Pitts should get a chance. The heir apparent to Julio Jones. I was against the Kyle Pitts draft pick leading up to the draft until word started getting out that Julio Jones wanted out. I'm like, well, that makes sense. Okay, if you're looking for a long-term replacement for Julio Jones. But people that were talking about Kyle Pitts as being a win-now mentality, I'm like, no, you can't protect the quarterback, you can't run the ball, and you can't play defense. What good is another receiver going to do you? But it made sense. So Kyle Pitts is one to watch for there. In the secondary, that's where you're going to have some good looks. It's all new faces in the Atlanta Falcons defensive secondary. AJ Terrell's got one spot locked on corner. There's two journeyman type safeties in Daron Harmon and Eric Harris, and then rookie Richie Grant from UCF is someone that'll be pushing them from playing time. I think he could be pretty interesting to watch too.
Yeah, that's a similarity between these teams and something in an area where Titans veterans will play because they've overhauled their secondary too, and three of the four primary starters are new, led by a guy Falcons fans know well from the AFC South in the last couple of years, and Jack Rabbit Jenkins, who's had a real positive impact in terms of the attitude and the aggressiveness of that group. And then
he was a really good player for the Saints. He was a really good player for them.
Yeah, he's come in and a guy who's in his he's 32 years old in his 10th year, whatever he is now, and I mean from the first day, even in OTAs and mini camps, that guy was battling and breaking up passes and going after things, and it's had an effect on that group. And Titans were terrible in pass defense last year, and that's so I think those guys will play a couple of series together to sort of work on the communication and things that are required in the secondary and start building to what they hope will be a much better season this year.
So you mentioned Caleb Farley. Is it Farley or Farley? Caleb
Farley, yes.
Caleb Farley. Okay, F-A-R-E. You're never sure. It looks like I'm better with the Hispanic names. When we do our Broncos for Breakfast podcast, we say hello. I'm better with the Hispanic names. The English is a weird language. But rookies, you already mentioned that Caleb Farley is going to be out. Now, there were injury concerns for him coming out of Virginia Tech. I read your article that you had on him on SI. We'll drop a link in here also, si.com/NFL/Titans. And I read it, and I got a little hint of I'm a little annoyed with this guy and the fact that he never seems to be on the field. Am I wrong?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that. It's sort of he wasn't healthy enough to start training camp, which wasn't a surprise to anybody. He had two back surgeries a little more than a year apart. The second one was just in February, and that's sort of how he ended up with the Titans in the first place at the number 22 pick. Most people would tell you he's much better athletically than that, but there are medical questions about him. I think it was only 4 practices into camp before he passed his physical and was ready to go. And that was, I thought that was good news to a lot of people, but he's he's been healthy in his practice since, but he's had some moments. There was one where he kind of got lost in coverage, fell down and just laid there. And boy, the head coach let him hear it, for just laying there and not getting up and at least running somewhere, trying to do something. And, but Farley is one of these guys, from what I've seen, who he wants to be great right now, and doesn't necessarily trust the process of becoming great, which would make sense for a guy who only played 22 games in college. Missed his true freshman year because he was injured, sat out 2020 because he was injured and COVID concerns, and wanted to prepare for the draft and whatnot. He hasn't gone through all of that. And I think with him, there's going to come a moment where the switch flips, if you will, and all of a sudden everything makes sense to him and he'll be a different player. But right now he's overthinking, he's trying too hard, and he is, I guess, still on the mend from a couple of back surgeries. So they said, he's not ready to play this game. We'll keep working with him, see if he's ready to go for the next one.
I think a good word for that is just overwhelmed.
Yeah.
As far as I'm trying, I don't mean to be negative about him, because obviously, I mean, we're talking back surgery here. I'm surprised he's back this soon. No pun intended. I'm surprised he's back this soon. But when I read your quote from it was Vrabel, I think, that about him staying down, and you start wondering about the mental toughness in there just a little bit. But again, a lot of it could just be pure frustration, and hopefully some of the veterans are taking him under his wing and getting him up, because there's a hell of a player in there.
Yeah. While we're talking about rookies too, another guy that's been really interesting with the Titans is second-round draft pick Dylan Radins out of North Dakota State. Another guy who he played one game last year, and his college experience is at the FCS level. And so, what he's sort of a mystery in terms of what you can get out of him. The feeling was when the Titans drafted him that, he was going to immediately plug into the battle to be the starting right tackle this year. But throughout the offseason, throughout the first couple weeks of training camp here, this guy lines up at right tackle, right guard, left guard. A lot of times two positions within the same, within a span of 4 or 5 plays, they are moving him all over the place, trying to get a feel for him, trying to get him as much experience as possible, which says to me, one, he's versatile, which is good, but it also says to me he is not a candidate to be the starting right tackle, because if he was, they'd be playing him every snap possible at right tackle, trying to force feed him everything there is about that position. So, Radins is not going to be a week 1 starter for this team. But it's sort of like the first guy to get hurt on the line. They want to be able to plug him in anywhere then and see exactly what they have in him.
And the Falcons have a couple of guys like that too. And Drew Dahlman, he was drafted as a center out of Stanford. This was a great move by new general manager Terry Fontenot. They needed a safety. They had to come out of this draft with a safety. They targeted Richie Grant. They're sitting at 35. They made a trade with the Denver Broncos to go from 35 to 40 and still got Richie Grant and a 4th-round pick that they turned into Drew Dahlman, who is now running second team at 2 different positions. And then Jalen Mayfield is another one to watch. He's kind of a masher. To me, that sounds like it fits a perfect guy for an Arthur Smith offense. It's like, oh, he's not so great in pass protection. I mean, you're going to run some 2 tight end sets. Don't you just want a people mover there in this offense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and especially if you can on the right side, that's kind of what the Titans have always tried to do, and I would assume that Arthur's just in his mind's eye, he wants to be heavy on that right side of the line again, because that's sort of the way he works.
Well, and going back to one of your rookies, I was at the Senior Bowl and I saw a lot of non-Power 5 offensive linemen that really stood out. And Radins was one of those guys. Another one, there were 2 of them. I kept getting them confused because they both end in S or in Z, and they came from schools that I've never watched. With Quinn Miners, came from North Dakota State, or one of them was Wisconsin Whitewater, and the other one's North Dakota State. Like I said, I keep getting confused.
Yeah, Radins is North Dakota State.
But you just described Miners as well, because they played all 3 positions at the Senior Bowl. They're getting looks back and forth at interior line. So the Denver Broncos have a guy that they're keeping an eye on that was very similar to this, who might not be ready to play, but we want to cross-train him so we can throw him in there if we're needed. But I was a big fan of Radins. And then I'll have to look his name up. I apologize. I didn't even say it. There's a center that the Carolina Panthers signed as an undrafted free agent out of Grambling State. I remember schools and teams better than names these days. That was a standout too. But I was a big fan of Radins. I thought he was really good. And I've got some highlights of his Senior Bowl action on my channel. So one last thing here before I let you go here. Arthur Smith offense and man management. You mentioned he didn't necessarily play, but if you follow baseball, I feel like the best managers are former catchers that never made it anywhere. They just love the game, study the game, and work and know the game. You see centers like that. Center's a little bit like the catcher position in NFL. You got to know everything, and it's not glamorous, and you might be undersized and not make it. So what can you tell us a little bit about Arthur Smith as a man manager? Because he has to do a decent job of getting the best out of his offense while he was there.
Yeah, Arthur's an interesting guy in that he he does a really good job doing the job he has right now. But when he gets promotions, he's prepared for those moments, and we saw that here with the Titans. He started under head coach Mike Munchak, and in a lot of ways was sort of Munchak's glorified secretary. Almost did some paperwork things in addition to a lot of coaching type stuff. He took a job just to get a job in an NFL building because that's what he wanted to do, and then when Munchak got fired and Ken Wisenhunt came along, he convinced Wisenhunt to keep him on staff as an offensive assistant and assistant tight end coach, and he did that. And then when Wisenhunt got fired and tight ends coach Mike Mularkey gets promoted, then Arthur slides in and becomes the tight ends coach. And right away, guys talked about how ready he was for the job and how good he was at that job. And then when Mike Vrabel comes in, Vrabel keeps him in that job and then eventually promotes him to offensive coordinator. And now here we are. That the fact that he hasn't climbed over people to get where he was, but managed to keep an eye out for what he wanted to do, knew what he wanted to do, was ready to go when he got there. It speaks a lot to sort of his ability with people, and that he deals honestly with guys. And I talked earlier about he identifies what guys do well and does that. I think he's very honest with players too, in terms of, hey, look, this is what you're going to do for us. This is why you're going to do it for us, and don't worry about this other stuff because that's not you, and we're not going to ask you to do that. And he has a way of putting people at ease and making them believe, but it's not real rah-rah stuff. It's not pump you up. It's just sort of you come away. I think you come away from a conversation with them going, oh, okay, well that's how I am, or okay, that's what I'm going to do this game. And it's very clear in terms of his messaging.
And in international football, they call it a new manager bounce. They do a lot of in-season changes, and then a team will start playing a lot better. And I'm hoping for Falcons fans that that's not what this is right now, but there's definitely a bounce going. There's a positive vibe. All the players in there, they all come to the press conferences with big smiles. They're like, man, I love it. I love it. They're honest with me. The tempo of practice is great. They're straight up. It's transparent. It's fair. The Falcons, I said, with that roster shouldn't be below 500 team. So maybe they can see a bounce, a new manager bounce, and maybe that starts tonight. This will be our first look. So, David, I want to thank you for being here, and make sure you can follow David and get all of his stuff that he's posting, not just on Titans. He does some other work too, but follow him on Boclair Sports. We'll drop some links in the video after the fact. But I want to thank you for being here. And any final words, any predictions on what we should look for tonight?
I think it's one of those, like to your point with the bounce. I feel like if you care about preseason results at all, I feel like the Falcons are going to win this game fairly handily because they need to. Arthur Smith needs to build a little more excitement and to create some good feelings that way. And yes, it's just a preseason game, but a win is always a win. And the Titans are going to be sitting a lot of guys. Titans have, they sort of have their sights set on week one in a lot of ways. So I feel like Arthur Smith is gonna keep maybe some of his frontline players in a little longer, coach this game to win it a little bit more than the Titans will. So I feel like if that means anything to folks out there, that this will be a good night for the home team.
Yeah, the wins and loss for tonight isn't necessarily as important, but I agree with you, and I think the Falcons will win this game because they've got a lot more to prove.
Yes.
You got a new coach who's trying to work in a new system. So like you said, the veterans might come in a little bit more, and they got roster battles all over the place. So when the twos come in, those guys are going to be playing like their hair's on fire. They might not be quite as talented, but all through that roster, there's guys that are fighting for spots that might not necessarily be there for the Tennessee Titans. So I think the intensity from the Atlanta Falcons playing in front of their home fans for the first time in a long time is going to benefit the Falcons. So I agree with you. I think the Falcons will win this game, but it's the roster battles that we talked about that I think will be key to watch. But David, I want to say thank you for being here, and we'll have to do this again real soon as we move through the season. And where can we find you? Let me give us. We plugged your Twitter account, but where else can we find some of your work?
Yeah, at Boclair Sports, and then as you said, si.com/NFL/Titans. I'm churning it out every day. Three, four fresh items every day. So.
All right, David. Well, we appreciate you, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Sounds great, Scott. Thanks.
Well, that was David Boclair. I'm Scott Kennedy. That was the Tennessee Titans Atlanta Falcons preview, and we finished off by talking about how we think the game's going to end up. But really, it's more about the roster battles that come through and some of the things. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like Falcons fans are going to see Julio Jones back in the Dome. That might be a good thing for Julio. I think his reception would be okay, but the way he left at the end, first controversial thing he said in a 10-year career when I think he got gotcha'd by Shannon Sharpe. So watch tonight. We're going to see some – I'm very interested. The player I'm most interested to watch is probably Cordarrelle Patterson. I think the Falcons are going to win this game because, like I said, I think they got a little bit more to prove. As always, please do us a favor by hitting like, follow, share, subscribe. If you're watching on Facebook, if you're watching on YouTube, that's the best way you can help us. And we'll be doing this a lot more often now that we're finally back to football. Take care and have a good weekend.